My name is Richard Hufford. I'm 65 years old, and for most of my life I believed being a good father and grandfather meant saying yes, even when it cost me more than anyone could see. For years my home was the safe harbor where my son Ryan and his wife Nancy dropped anchor whenever they needed a break. Holidays, weekends, school vacations, it didn't matter. I rearranged my days, canceled plans, and swallowed my own exhaustion because I told myself this was love. But love, when it turns into expectation, starts to feel less like giving and more like being used. I didn't notice when the gratitude faded and the thank yous disappeared. I didn't notice when the small favors turned into obligations and when "would you mind" became "you'll do it." By the time I realized, I was no longer asked. I was scheduled. This Christmas, though, something changed. For the first time in decades, I decided to choose myself. And that choice started with one word I hadn't said in years: no. Nancy sat at my kitchen table like she was running a business meeting, not talking to me in my own home. She had her planner open, pages marked with colored tabs and a pen clicking in her hand. So she began without even looking up at me. "You'll keep the kids from the 20th until after New Year's. That way Ryan and I can actually relax on our trip. We'll be gone a full 12 days, so you'll need to keep their schedule straight. Thomas has soccer practice twice that first week, and Ellie's piano lessons can't be missed. Don't worry, I've written it all down for you." She slid a sheet of paper across the table toward me like it was a set of official instructions. My own son, Ryan, sat beside her, nodding along, his face buried in his phone. He didn't look up. He didn't even notice my hands still resting on my coffee mug, not moving. Nancy kept on talking. "I've packed their vitamins already, and Thomas needs to wear his retainer at night. Ellie still wets the bed sometimes, so you'll want to keep extra sheets handy. Oh, and make sure they don't have too much sugar before bed, or you'll be up all night." She flipped to another page in her planner. "Christmas morning. They'll want the same traditions, of course. Pancakes with whipped cream, stockings before presents. You know the drill. I already bought matching pajamas for everyone, so be sure they're wearing them when we FaceTime. I'll text you the time." Ryan finally put his phone down long enough to add, "Yeah, Dad, you're good with this, right? You always say you love having the kids around." For a moment, I didn't say a word. I just held my coffee mug, the warmth seeping into my palms, steadying me. I looked at Nancy, so sure of herself, writing down every expectation, like I was some hired help. I looked at Ryan, who should have known better, but who never spoke up. I took a slow sip, set my mug down, and smiled. Not the polite smile I'd used for years. This one was different. "Perfect," I said evenly, "because my flight for a 2-week cruise leaves tonight." The sound of her pen stopped mid-click. Nancy's head snapped up, eyes wide. Ryan blinked like he hadn't heard me right. "I'm sorry, what?" Nancy asked, her voice suddenly sharp. "You heard me," I said. "I'll be gone until after New Year's, so you and Ryan can handle the kids." The room went quiet. Not just quiet, but heavy. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. Nancy stared at me, waiting for me to laugh, to say I was joking, to soften the blow. I didn't. I stood, gathered a few plates left from breakfast, and carried them to the sink. I rinsed them, set them neatly on the drying rack, and wiped my hands. My back was straight, my voice steady. Nancy spoke first. "Richard, you can't be serious. We've already booked everything. The kids are counting on you." Ryan finally chimed in. "Dad, you've always done it before. You're the one who says you love being grandpa. Why would this year be different?" I turned, leaned against the counter, and looked them both in the eye. "Because this year, I'm not giving up my entire holiday to raise your kids while you vacation. This year I'm choosing something for myself." Neither of them said a word. In that silence, I realized something important. For years, I had let them make the plans. I had let them assume my time was theirs to use. I had smiled, kept quiet, and swallowed my exhaustion because I told myself it was family. But this time was different. This time I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt. I was done. I used to love having my grandkids for a night or two back when it felt like a treat, not a job. We'd bake cookies, watch movies, and I'd tuck them in with extra blankets. Ryan would thank me. Nancy would say how grateful she was. But little by little, It stopped being gratitude and started being expectation. What began as weekends turned into weeks. What was once an occasional sleepover became a full-time shift. Last Christmas, I had them for nearly 2 weeks. I cooked 3 meals a day, washed endless loads of laundry, stayed up with fevers, and kept the house running while Nancy sent me pictures of her on a ski slope holding hot chocolate. Ryan posted photos of them smiling by a fireplace. Not one mention of who was at home doing the hard part. I remembered that night clear as day, sitting on the edge of my bed, too tired to even take off my slippers, whispering, "What if I can't do this again next year?" That was the moment I knew something had to change. So, when Nancy clicked her pen and told me what I'd be doing this Christmas, like she was assigning me a job, I finally said what I'd been holding in for far too long. Perfect. Because my flight for a 2-week cruise leaves tonight. They could handle it. And for once, I didn't take it back. That's how it started. And that's when I realized something simple. I wasn't being asked anymore. I was being scheduled. I can still remember the early years back when having the kids overnight felt like a gift to me. Ryan and Nancy would drop them off with little backpacks and a couple of favorite toys, and I'd have the whole night planned out. We'd bake cookies, read stories, and maybe watch a Christmas movie if it was close to the holidays. Thomas was just a toddler then, and Ellie was still in diapers. I'd spread a blanket on the living room floor, dump a box of blocks in front of them, and laugh as they stacked and toppled towers over and over. They'd giggle so hard they could hardly catch their breath. Those were the kind of sounds that filled my house with joy. Back then, Ryan always thanked me. He'd say, "Dad, we really appreciate it. I don't know what we'd do without you." And Nancy would bring along a small treat, maybe a pie she picked up from the bakery or a candle she thought I'd like. They weren't grand gestures, but they meant something. It felt like we were all in it together. I loved tucking those kids into bed. I'd sit on the edge, pull the covers up tight, and read them the same stories I once read to Ryan. Their little eyes would flutter closed before I even finished the last page. And I'd just sit there a moment, listening to their soft breathing. I thought to myself, this is what being a grandpa is all about. At Christmas, I made it even more special. One year, I helped Thomas roll out sugar cookies, and we decorated them with red and green sprinkles. His hands were sticky, his shirt covered in flour, and he kept sneaking bites of raw dough. Ellie, still tiny, smeared icing all over her face more than on the cookies. I didn't mind. I took pictures, printed them out, and stuck them on the fridge. Those nights never felt like work. I was tired, yes, but it was the happy kind of tired, the kind you get after doing something you love. But things don't always stay the same. As the years went on, the overnights became more frequent. It started with just one night here and there, then it became 2 nights in a row. After that, whole weekends. Before long, it was a regular part of my schedule, not just an occasional treat. I told myself it was still good. I told myself I was helping, and I was. But there was a shift. I could feel it. Ryan stopped saying thank you as often. Nancy stopped bringing those little tokens. Instead of, "Would you mind keeping them?" it turned into, "We'll drop them off Friday." No pause, no question, just a statement. I noticed it most around Christmas break when the kids were out of school. Nancy would say, "It'll be easier if they just stay with you. That way we don't have to worry about sitters or camps." And at first I thought, sure, why not? I wanted to make Christmas magical for my grandkids. So I said yes. I always said yes. The kids would come with their bags, and I'd set up the guest room like a little holiday retreat. Stockings hung on the ends of the beds, extra cocoa mix in the kitchen, Christmas music playing in the background. I wanted them to remember Grandpa's house as the place where Christmas felt the most special. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was doing more than creating memories. I was filling in all the gaps so their parents didn't have to. The first time I felt it was when I kept them for almost an entire week while Ryan and Nancy went on a trip right after Christmas. They left me with instructions, bags of clothes, and a note about bedtime routines. I followed everything because I didn't want the kids to feel thrown off. By the 3rd night, I was worn out. Ellie had caught a cold and kept waking up crying. Thomas refused to eat the dinner I made and begged for fast food. My living room looked like a toy store had exploded. I sat on the couch late at night, rubbing my temples, thinking, I'm 64 years old. I shouldn't be this exhausted at Christmas. That's when it hit me. This wasn't time with my grandkids anymore. This wasn't baking cookies or watching Christmas movies just for fun. It wasn't staying up late for one magical night. It was full-time babysitting, handed over to me without question. It stopped being time with my grandkids, and it started being free childcare. The difference was clear when I babysat, because I wanted to. The kids and I laughed together. We built gingerbread houses, went for walks to look at Christmas lights, and made ornaments out of construction paper. When I babysat because I was told to, I felt drained. I wasn't enjoying the moments. I was counting the hours until bedtime. And the worst part, Ryan and Nancy didn't even see the difference. They acted like I had nothing else to do, nowhere else to be, no other plans for myself. They forgot I had a life of my own. It stung because I remembered those early years when they used to thank me, when they treated my help like a blessing, not a given. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it changed, but I knew it had. The more I thought back, the clearer it became. I had allowed it. I had smiled, nodded, and agreed every time they asked. I thought that was what a good father and grandfather did. But all it really did was teach them that I'd always say yes. That's how I got here. Sitting in my kitchen this year with Nancy rattling off schedules like she was in charge, I realized this wasn't about Christmas anymore. It was about respect. And I had finally run out of excuses to keep quiet. Last Christmas was the year that finally opened my eyes. I had Thomas and Ellie for 12 straight days. 12. From the moment school let out until after New Year's. Ryan and Nancy dropped them off with bags of clothes, a pile of toys, and a list of reminders. They smiled, said they were heading to Colorado for a ski trip, and waved as if they were leaving their kids at a professional daycare instead of their own father's home. By the second day, my house was already upside down. Toys covered the living room floor. The guest room looked like a tornado had blown through it, and my laundry baskets were stacked high. I couldn't keep up. Every time I turned around, there was another mess waiting for me. Sticky cups on the counter, socks under the couch, crayons on the table. Meals were constant. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks in between. I was cooking almost all day and cleaning up almost all night. If I wasn't washing dishes, I was folding clothes. If I wasn't folding clothes, I was sweeping crumbs. My body ached in places I didn't even know could hurt from bending, lifting, and standing so much. And through it all, my phone would buzz with updates from Ryan and Nancy, pictures of them in heavy coats, smiling with hot chocolate in hand, shots of ski lifts, hotel fireplaces, dinners out at restaurants. Nancy wrote captions like, "Much-needed getaway and family time in the mountains." And there I was, family too, stuck at home, running on fumes with their children. One night stands out the most. Ellie woke up with a fever. Her little face was red and her body felt hot to the touch. She cried, wanting her mom. I sat in the rocking chair with her until nearly 3 o'clock in the morning, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead and humming softly to keep her calm. I checked her temperature every half hour and whispered prayers that it wouldn't climb higher. By morning, I was too tired to think straight. Thomas was already bouncing around the house, wanting breakfast, wanting attention, wanting everything at once. My kitchen looked like it hadn't been cleaned in days, though I had scrubbed it just hours earlier. I poured cereal into bowls with shaky hands and realized I hadn't eaten myself. That evening, after finally getting them both settled, I collapsed onto my own bed. I didn't bother changing into pajamas. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, whispering, "What if I can't do this again next year?" That question hit me harder than I expected. I'd never allowed myself to ask it before. I had always just assumed I would manage somehow, that I'd push through because that's what fathers and grandfathers did. But lying there with my body aching and my head pounding, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just tired, I was drained. I was 65. And while I loved my grandkids with all my heart, I couldn't keep pretending I was still 35 and able to juggle it all. The worst part was knowing Ryan and Nancy had no idea what it was costing me. They didn't see the piles of laundry. They didn't see me running between the stove and the living room. They didn't see me kneeling beside a bed with a sick child at midnight. They were sipping wine at a lodge while I paced the floor with their daughter in my arms. I look back at those 12 days and realize they hadn't even called to check in more than once or twice. The kids missed them, but they didn't miss the kids. They trusted me to handle everything without complaint, and I had, but at what price? That was the first time I let myself think the word no. Not just to myself, but to them. No to being the default babysitter. No to putting my needs aside every holiday. No to being scheduled without a choice. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Saying no never is, especially to your own child. But as I lay in that bed last year, fighting off exhaustion, I understood that if I didn't start setting boundaries, they would never stop pushing. I thought about what would happen if I got sick. What if I couldn't keep up? Would they even notice, or would they just keep dropping off the kids and heading out the door? The thought scared me, but it also cleared my vision. I wasn't being cruel by thinking of myself. I was being realistic. That night, I promised myself something. If the same request came around next Christmas, I wouldn't just smile and nod. I wouldn't accept being told what I'd be doing. I would speak up. And when Nancy sat at my kitchen table this year with her planner open and her voice full of certainty, I remembered that promise. That was when the word no stopped being an idea in my head and finally became a decision in my life. If you've ever whispered, "I can't do this anymore," in your own bed, you'll know how heavy it feels. That night, after Nancy and Ryan left my kitchen in shock, I sat at the table alone. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were loud. I poured myself a cup of tea and pulled an old notebook out of the drawer. It was one of those spiral-bound pads I used to jot down grocery lists or reminders. The cover was bent and some pages were missing, but it would do. On the first page I wrote, "What I've given." I stared at those 3 words for a long time before the pen even touched the paper. Then I started listing. The first thing that came to mind was groceries. I wrote down all the extra shopping I had done over the years whenever the kids stayed. Milk, cereal, chicken nuggets, juice boxes, snacks for lunches. Not to mention the big holiday meals when the cart was so full I had to push with both hands. I remembered last December when I spent nearly $400 at the store because Ryan and Nancy were dropping off the kids for almost 2 weeks. They never once asked about the cost. They just said, "Thanks, Dad. You're the best," and walked out. Next, I wrote money, little amounts that added up. The $50 I slipped Ryan when he said gas prices were too high. The $100 I left in an envelope for Nancy when she mentioned she was short on grocery money one week. The bigger things, too. The time I paid the plumber when their sink backed up and they didn't have the funds. I never asked for any of it back. Then I wrote babysitting. At first it was occasional, just for a night. They'd say one night, and it would stretch into a weekend. Then it became a week during spring break, then summer days when camps were too expensive. Every time I adjusted my own schedule to make it work. Doctor appointments, church activities, even simple plans with friends. I'd move or cancel them to watch the kids. I filled the page with examples until there was barely any space left. When I leaned back in my chair, the paper looked heavy, like it carried more weight than I had realized. I turned to the next page and wrote, "Holidays." That word alone made my chest tighten. I listed every Christmas break I had taken over, all the sleepovers, the matching pajamas, the morning pancakes, the piles of wrapping paper. At first it was joyful, but in the last 5 years it had turned into a job. I wasn't doing it because I chose to. I was doing it because I was expected to. I stared at the pages, 3 of them now, covered in my handwriting. What I saw was plain. They didn't see me. They only saw what I could provide. It stung because I loved my grandkids. I loved Ryan, even Nancy, though we never saw eye to eye. But love doesn't mean letting yourself be used until there's nothing left. I closed the notebook and sat still for a while. That's when I noticed the brochure sitting on the counter. My neighbor Carol had dropped it off a week earlier, saying, "You should think about it, Richard. A group of us are going." I had smiled and set it aside. Sure, it wasn't for me. Now I picked it up. On the cover was a picture of a large white ship against bright blue water. The words read, "Caribbean Cruise, December 20th through January 3rd. I opened it slowly. Photos of palm trees, sandy beaches, Smiling seniors holding glasses of iced tea, cabins with balconies, restaurants with buffets, activities scheduled for every day. I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach. It seemed too big, too far, too much. But another part of me whispered, why not? I turned the brochure over and saw the contact number. My hand shook a little as I dialed, but I didn't hang up. A cheerful voice answered, explained the details, and asked if I wanted to book. I hesitated. My old habits told me to wait, to think it over, to make sure Ryan and Nancy didn't need me. But then I remembered that night last Christmas, sitting on the edge of my bed whispering, what if I can't do this again next year? I didn't want another year of exhaustion. I wanted something different. So I gave the woman my information. I read off my credit card number. When she said, congratulations, Mr. Hufford, you're booked. I felt my chest loosen like I'd been holding my breath for years and finally let it go. When I hung up, I just sat there staring at the confirmation number I had written down. It looked so simple on paper, but to me it was the biggest step I'd taken in a long time. I folded the brochure, tucked it into my notebook, and whispered to myself, this year, I'm choosing me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel dread creeping in. As December got closer, I felt excitement, and I knew no matter what Ryan or Nancy said, I wasn't backing down. Once I booked that cruise, I felt like a weight had lifted. For the first time in years, I had something of my own to look forward to. But I didn't rush around telling everyone. I didn't explain or defend my choice, I just quietly started getting ready. First thing, I arranged care for my cat, Rosie. She's been with me 12 years, and I couldn't leave without making sure she was looked after. My neighbor Gloria lives 2 houses down. She's a widow like me, and she has always been kind. When I asked if she could feed Rosie and check in while I was gone, she said yes, without hesitation. Go enjoy yourself, Richard, she told me. You've earned it. That one sentence meant more than she knew. Next, I started straightening up the house. Normally, when Ryan and Nancy planned to bring the kids, I prepare everything like I was running a daycare. Extra sheets on the beds, snacks in the pantry, puzzles and games stacked on the table. Not this time. I kept it simple. I vacuumed the rugs, washed my own laundry, and wiped down the counters. That was it. No bags of groceries, no holiday decorations pulled out of the attic for little hands to touch. No toys scattered around waiting for play. My house looked neat, quiet, and like it belonged to me. When it came time to pack, I didn't overthink it. I laid out my suitcase on the bed and chose what I really needed. Comfortable clothes for walking the ship, a couple of nicer outfits for dinners, my sturdy shoes, and a sweater for cooler nights on deck. I tucked in my Bible, a crossword puzzle book, and a novel I had been meaning to read. I wasn't packing for children. I was packing for myself. It felt strange at first. For years, my Christmas packing meant stuffing gift bags or making sure I had enough wrapping paper. Now it was just one small suitcase for me. And it felt good. I kept everything to myself. No big announcement, no family group message. I didn't need to justify why I was leaving. I had done that all my life. Explained, excused, softened my choices. Not anymore. This trip was mine. And that was reason enough. The real test came a few days later. Ryan and Nancy pulled into my driveway with the kids, Christmas break bags in tow. I could see them hauling out backpacks, duffels, and even a cooler like they were setting up for a long stay. Nancy came to the door first, smiling like it was already decided. Here we are, she said. They've been so excited to stay at Grandpa's again. She turned to Thomas and Ellie. Say thank you to Grandpa for having you. The kids hugged me tight, and my heart ached. I love them, and that never changes. But I also knew what I had to say. I knelt down, kissed their cheeks, and told them I loved them. Then I stood up and faced Ryan and Nancy. I won't be here tonight, I said calmly. I'm heading out. I'm leaving for my cruise. Nancy froze, her smile fading. Your what? My cruise, I repeated. 2 weeks. Caribbean. I booked it a while ago. Ryan frowned. Dad, you never said anything about this. We already planned on you keeping the kids. I shook my head. You didn't ask. You told me, and I told you this year would be different. I wasn't joking. The kids looked confused, but I kept my voice gentle with them. You'll be fine. Your mom and dad have you covered, and I'll see you after New Year's. Nancy crossed her arms. You can't just decide something like this without telling us. Yes, I can, I answered. My voice stayed steady. I've spent too many years letting you assume I'd always be available. Not this time. The silence that followed was thick. Ryan shifted his weight like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. Nancy's mouth opened, then closed again. Finally, Ryan said, "So, you're really leaving tonight?" "Yes," I said. "My bag is already packed." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I didn't try to make it easier for them. I simply stood my ground. They gathered their things slowly, still looking stunned, and headed back to the car with the kids. Ellie waved at me from the back seat, and I waved back, blowing her a kiss. My love for them wasn't in question, but so was my right to live my own life. When the car pulled away, I walked back inside, shut the door, and looked at my suitcase by the hallway. Everything was ready. For once, I wasn't leaving my house prepared for someone else's comfort. I was leaving it prepared for my own peace. That evening, when I closed the trunk on my suitcase and backed out of the driveway, I felt lighter than I had in years. When Ryan and Nancy pulled out of my driveway that afternoon, I knew it wasn't the end of the conversation. People like them never let go that easily. Sure enough, not even an hour later, my phone buzzed. Nancy's text lit up the screen. "You can't be serious. Who's gonna watch them?" I read it once and set the phone down. I didn't need to respond. I had already said what I needed to say, and it was the truth. A few minutes later, another message came. "We've already paid for everything. Flights, hotels, ski passes. You're ruining our plans." Then Ryan chimed in. "Dad, this isn't like you. The kids are counting on you. Don't let them down." I shook my head at that one. They weren't the ones counting on me. It was Ryan and Nancy. They were the ones who had gotten used to dropping their responsibilities at my feet like bags of laundry. The kids would be fine with their own parents. That's how it works. I didn't text back. I didn't defend myself. I knew where that road led. Years of excuses, years of me softening the truth just to keep the peace. Not this time. By the time I was at the port that evening, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Selfish. Cold. Unbelievable. I let the words sit there without giving them power. I watched the lights of the cruise ship glow brighter as the sun dipped low on the horizon. People were milling about with their luggage, excited chatter filling the air. For once, I was part of that group instead of the one standing at a kitchen sink with aching feet. When it was my turn to board, I handed over my ticket and walked up the ramp. My suitcase rolled easily behind me. I could feel my heart beating faster, but it wasn't nerves. It was relief. On deck, I leaned against the railing and looked back at the port. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, but I didn't pull it out. Instead, I took a deep breath of the salty air and smiled. I thought about Nancy's question earlier. Who's going to watch them? The answer was simple. Their parents. That's how it works. It wasn't my job to raise my grandchildren. It wasn't my job to make sure Ryan and Nancy had stress-free holidays. I had already raised my child. I had already done the late nights, the sick days, the endless laundry. I wasn't going to sign up for another round just because they wanted to play carefree in the mountains. As the ship pulled away from shore, I finally took my phone out. The screen was filled with missed calls and long messages. I scrolled through a few. "Nancy, this is beyond selfish. Who does this to their own family?" "Ryan, you could have at least warned us sooner. This is cruel, Dad." Nancy again. "The kids are crying. Hope you're happy." I placed the phone face down on the table in my cabin and let it stay there. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to let guilt drag me back. For the first time, I was letting the weight of their choices rest with them. Later that night, as the ship cut through the water, I stood on the balcony outside my cabin. The lights from shore were faint in the distance, and the sea stretched wide and dark around me. I wrapped a sweater tight and closed my eyes. The only sound was the steady hum of the engine and the waves below. I thought about all the Christmas Eves I had spent running around my kitchen, timing the oven, wrapping last-minute gifts, tucking restless kids into bed. And here I was, letting the ocean carry me forward with nothing to do but breathe. That's when I felt it fully. Freedom. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't wild, it was quiet, steady, and deep. A freedom that came from finally saying no and meaning it. The texts kept coming for a while, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My choice was clear. And as the ship sailed farther from shore, I knew something for certain. For once, the only person I was responsible for this Christmas was me. The first morning on the ship, I woke up without an alarm. No small voices at my door. No noise from cartoons blaring in the living room. Just the soft sound of the ocean outside my cabin window. I slipped on a sweater, went up to the deck, and carried a cup of coffee to a quiet corner. The sun was just starting to rise, streaks of orange across the water. I wrapped both hands around the warm mug and let the peace sink in. I wasn't rushing to cook pancakes. I wasn't folding laundry before the day even started. I wasn't checking lists of practices or lessons. For the first time in years, my Christmas week began with calm instead of chaos. On board, the days fell into an easy rhythm. Breakfast on the deck, a walk around the ship, sometimes a lecture or a movie. In the afternoon, I met a couple of men about my age who were also traveling alone. We'd sit together at meals, swapping stories about kids and grandkids, laughing in a way I hadn't in a long time. In the evenings, we'd go to the shows, small concerts, comedy acts, even a dance group one night. None of it required me to lift a finger. I just sat back and enjoyed. While I was living that back home, things were playing out much differently. I heard later from my neighbor Gloria, who talks to just about everyone. She told me Nancy had been scrambling from the moment I left. Their trip didn't go as planned because suddenly they had no one to leave the kids with. Nancy called around trying to find sitters. Most were booked for the holidays. The few who were available wanted high rates. That shocked her. She complained about the cost, but what choice did she have? From what I gathered, the kids ended up being dragged along on some of their outings. Ski trips with tired children in tow. Late dinners where Thomas got cranky and Ellie fell asleep at the table. Nancy was frustrated. Ryan was short-tempered, and the pictures they posted online looked nothing like the glossy ones from years past. Meanwhile, I was sitting at a small table by the pool, enjoying fresh fruit and reading my book without interruption. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. On Christmas Day, the ship's dining room was decorated with lights and wreaths. I sat with the two men I had met, sharing a meal that someone else cooked and served. Turkey, mashed potatoes, pie for dessert. I didn't scrub a single pan. When I got back to my cabin that night, I stretched out on the bed and thought about all the years I had collapsed after cooking and cleaning for 14 hours straight. Not this year. This year I ended the day rested. Gloria later told me Ryan had cut their trip short. The kids were too restless, the cost too high, and nothing went smoothly. They drove back earlier than planned, worn out and irritated. For once, their chaos stayed with them, not with me. I thought about that as the ship sailed toward another island. I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel guilty either. I simply felt separate. Their holiday was theirs to handle, and mine was mine to enjoy. I didn't miss the whining. I didn't miss the piles of laundry. I didn't miss being told, "Thanks, Dad. You're the best," while they rushed out the door. What I had instead was quiet mornings on the deck, evenings filled with laughter, and a heart that finally felt light. Their chaos was finally their own, and for once I didn't miss a thing. A few days after I returned from the cruise, the phone rang. Ryan's name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before I picked up. "Dad," he said, his voice tight. "You should have told us earlier. We could have made different plans." I listened quietly. He waited as if I'd rush in with an apology. When I didn't, he went on. "You left us hanging. That's not like you. Honestly, it felt cruel." I answered calmly. Cruel would have been saying yes when I knew I couldn't do it anymore. I told you what I was doing. You just didn't believe me. There was a pause, then Ryan sighed. "Nancy says you were just having a mood, that you'll be back to normal next year." That word, mood, sat heavy in my ear, as if a lifetime of giving could be swept away with one dismissive word. "No, Ryan," I said firmly. "It wasn't a mood. It was a decision, a line I needed to draw. I won't be the default babysitter anymore." He didn't reply right away. I could hear dishes clanking in the background, kids talking. Finally, he muttered, "We'll talk later," and hung up. For the first time, I didn't feel shaken by his tone. I felt steady. In the days that followed, I looked around my house with new eyes. In the corner of the dining room sat a booster seat I hadn't used for months. The hall closet still held a folded-up crib from when Ellie was a toddler. The garage had boxes of toys, puzzles with missing pieces, and bins of clothes they'd long outgrown. I pulled it all out, one piece at a time, not in anger, but in quiet resolve. The booster seat went to a neighbor with a toddler. The old crib was picked up by a young couple down the street who were expecting their first baby. The toys and clothes went to a donation center. Each trip out of the house felt lighter. My rooms opened up. My closets breathed again. For years, I had stored things just in case, as if my house needed to stay ready at all times for children who weren't mine to raise. Letting it go wasn't bitter. It was freeing. By the time I finished, my home looked like mine again. Not a backup nursery, not a holiday daycare, not a storage unit for their convenience. Just my home. I sat in the living room one evening, the late sun shining through the clean windows. The space was open, uncluttered, and calm. I realized I didn't miss a single thing I had given away. What I did feel was peace. Peace because I had finally made a choice that respected me as much as I had always respected them. Peace because I no longer confused being useful with being loved. It wasn't about turning my back on my family. It was about turning back toward myself. And for the first time in years, I felt proud of drawing that line. Winter turned to spring, and life felt different. For once, I didn't have a holiday hangover from exhaustion. Instead, I carried the calm from my cruise into the new year. I joined a walking club that met at the park on Saturday mornings. At first, I was nervous, but soon I looked forward to it. A group of men around my age welcomed me in, and we strolled together, talking about our gardens, fishing trips, recipes, and even little frustrations about our families. We laughed in a way I hadn't in a long time. It reminded me that friendship and fresh air can do wonders for the soul. One afternoon, I decided to repaint my living room. For years, I had kept the walls neutral, thinking it would be better for when the grandkids were around. But this time, I picked a shade of pale blue I'd always loved. As I rolled the paint on, the room brightened, and I felt like I was finally making my house reflect me, not everyone else's needs. I also started planning ahead. In May, I booked another trip, a short getaway in the spring to a quiet lake not far from here. A cabin with a small porch just big enough for me and Rosie. It felt good to have something on the calendar that was mine alone, not tied to someone else's schedule. Months passed peacefully, until one evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. "You'll keep the kids for summer break, right?" No greeting, no question mark at the start, just an assumption softened into a sentence. I looked at the screen, smiled to myself, and typed back, "No, but I hope it goes well." That was all. Simple, clear, no guilt. When I set the phone down, I felt no heaviness in my chest, only lightness. Because once you stop letting others decide your life, you finally begin to live it. Choosing myself didn't mean I stopped loving my family. It meant I stopped confusing sacrifice with love. It meant I finally respected my own limits. And that choice gave me back more than I ever expected: peace, joy, and freedom. So now I want to ask you, the ones listening to my story, have you ever been expected to babysit like it was your job? Did you ever say no? Or are you still waiting to? Tell me below. I promise you're not alone. And if my story spoke to you, do me 3 small favors. Like this video so more people can find it. Share it with someone who might need the courage to set their own boundary. And subscribe, because there are more stories like this on the way. Lastly, download your free ebook titled Healthy Boundaries After 60. How to Set Strong Boundaries, Saying No with Grace, Protecting Your Peace, and Strengthening Relationships with Your Children by clicking the link in the pinned comment. Thank you for listening.